I don't know why, but when I was thinking about this topic, I started to get teary. I teared up, and I don't know why. It's- I don't know. Let's explore. Maybe I'll become a hot mess. I promise nothing. I promise that I won't become a wet mop bucket of a of a mess. I don't know. Uh, Probably not though. Welcome to Seared Stories from the Stove podcast. Paul Silva here, and we are diving into something. It's not fully formed for me, but I know it's going to be useful. It's going to be very useful to someone listening. Because as usual, I will start in the chefy world. I'll start in the kitchen. I'm going to kind of open it up a little bit, and I promise it's going to be helpful to someone. You know, one of the things that I have spoken about a lot on this podcast in different ways is the culture of the kitchen and abuse, isolation. We know that's part of being a chef or a cook, because everyone's got birthday parties and weddings and special events, and most of them happen on weekends. And so, guess what? You're working weekends. You got to commit to it. We know the long hours. We know about poor diet and no sunshine and sore feet and not enough sleep, and of course the drug and alcohol issues and deterioration of mental health and the stress and the duress that we were under, the strive for perfectionism, peer pressure. We see things in movies and TV that we're that caricatures and stereotypes of us. It's very militaristic, the culture. It can be toxic for your emotional well-being. It's highly critical, it's fast-paced, it's all these things. And God forbid if you speak out against any of this. God forbid if you would try to take care of your mental health and self-care, you'd be belittled. You'd be you risk your social status in the space, maybe even your job. And as a cisgender male, I can't speak to what it was like for women and gender non-conforming folks who I saw being ignored more or belittled. They had to work harder to even just get equal footing. And it was challenging, And I have spoken about how the culture has been changing, and I'm really glad. I'm really happy because I was in those spaces for a long time. And how did I survive that? Well, booze and lots of it, but also, because there was about seven, how many years was I sober and still in the industry? So it wasn't just booze. But earlier on, there was also a part of me that partook in some of that. And I'm not proud to say that because at first that's all I didn't know any better. And there weren't a lot of role models showing up otherwise, if you will. And it's not an excuse. And I've taken full responsibility for anything I have said and done in the kitchens to people and places. So I speak from a place of neutrality, from calm and peace and safety. But for a long time, I was anything but those things. And it was easy to integrate myself into that culture because it kept me at bay. I didn't want to feel threatened or unsafe and unsecure. So the issue with all that is that it just continued that culture. I was just part of the cog. I was just in the wheel. And at a deep level, I didn't like it. I felt that it was counter to who I was. And who I was and who I am in many ways is just a big softy. I'm a big softy. I've accepted that. And it was just like as a kid, I was very sensitive. And getting into a kitchen, felt with all these other tough guys, it made me feel like, oh, maybe I'm toughening up. And in some ways, yes. Yes, in some ways. But in many ways, it skewed what masculinity it was for me. It skewed what working, like proper humanistic working conditions were. It skewed my priorities and what I thought was most important. All for what? Ego, pride, all that nonsense. And the longer I got into it, the more I started to see that that was not who I was. But I didn't know what to do with that. And one of the most important things, so I'm going to step out of that for a second. So just park that for a moment. So after I left the industry, I got into coaching. And that was its own, like its whole thing. And I still do coach. And then I also got into, and still am, really expanded and had my spiritual life really activated. And very recently, something has come around that as well. I'll be sharing that a bit down the line. And in all three, the chefing, spiritual, and coaching community, I have found myself being very critical of them. Critical. And that's why it's taken me so long to step back into, like with Seared, back into this, because now I feel like there's something that's shifted for me. And one thing that ties all of these together for me is that with that criticism is that I stepped away from all of those communities because I saw things that weren't in alignment with who I am, who I was and am. I saw the grifters, I saw I saw the jokers, I saw the people that were not who I felt and judged, who are not in integrity, all sorts of stuff. And because of that, I pulled myself out of the equation because I said, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be associated with that community. Which may sound rational, right? Sounds rational. Of course, I don't want to be associated with that group. The problem is it pulls me away from those who might need me, who need to see me. And it's not an arrogance at all. And you'll see what I mean by this in a second. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. By me pulling away from these communities, I robbed people of the gift of myself. And we all do this in some way. Because you have gifts and talents and just your personal essence, your being, just like your soulful self is like that's your gift to everyone. And when we have our thinking egoic mind take the reins, we pull ourselves away from a situation. Sometimes it can be healthy, of course. But then we also allow that to win, if you will. So what does that mean? Jumping back in when I was chefing and struggling and like this inner struggle, like I'm a certain way. I'm not a hard ass. I just am not. I'm empathetic and I'm caring and I cared about my staff and there was just other things that ran counter to the culture of what chefing was and I struggled. And what I started to do was I started to look, instead of looking for more problems with the industry and more problems with like, look at this and blah, 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 I started to look for the lights. I started to look for the folks who I saw who modeled what it is that I felt more authentic about. So there were certain chefs that I started to work with. I was like, oh my God, they're not an asshole. That was the first thing. And second of all, oh my God, they care and they're kind and they're empathetic and they're compassionate and they know their stuff and they love teaching. Like all that stuff that I felt that was in me, finally I saw it reflected in someone in like flesh and blood. And then it's like once you start to look for that, you start to see them more. So this comes down to, like, you can talk about confirmation bias, all these other, psychological things. I think I've talked about this before. And once you start looking for the lights, you start to attract more of the lights, and you start to step into more of, like, because when you see something in someone that you admire, you're seeing something in yourself that you want to develop further. And so I started to see certain things in certain people I worked with, and chefs and other leaders, managers, didn't have to be in the kitchen. And people are like, oh my gosh, I would idolize them almost. And it was lovely. And so we can be those people to others. And that's what I mean by we rob people of the gift of us. So, as a friend told me not too long ago, we were talking about this, and they said, you can't let that community or whatever, or the perception of whatever, define you, right? Like when I was struggling to build my business, for my coaching business, I told someone back in the day, I was like, oh, I just don't want to be like so and so and so and so. Like, oh my God, they drive me. I don't want to be like that. And they said, then don't. And those two words, it was like a bomb went off. I'm like, oh my God, well, it's so silly that as I recounted, but it was mind blowing to me. Like, oh, I didn't have to do that. I could show up as myself. And here's the thing, folks. When you show up as yourself, you're going to attract, like energy attracts like energy. You're going to attract people who see in you something they see in themselves. They see a light in you, and they're moved to work with you, or to be alongside you, or to befriend you, or whatever it is. Now, of course, you need boundaries. I get a lot of people who want to be my buddy, and I'm just not. I'm not auditioning for any further friends, and so I have to have certain boundaries, and because then we're giving all our energy away. Um, but when you can step into that light and just be yourself, you just don't know who you're modeling something for. You just don't. And it's easy to step into like a mob mentality of like, oh, everyone's just negative, and okay, well, I'm just going to fit in the way I tried to fit in when I was a young cook. It, some of the bravest folks I have known that I've seen in kitchens, in restaurants, or any spaces, period, are those who just didn't care what people thought about them. And they just showed up as themselves. And they were like breaths of fresh air. And I loved them. Like they stood out, but in a really good way. While the rest of us were just these dipshits. You know what I mean? And it's just important to be that light for people. And, for me, getting sober, it was great to see other sober chefs and other sober people in the industry and related industries. Because, as I said earlier, tending to yourself was seen as weak. Day off? Psh, for what? I mean, I had to go to the hospital. I hurt myself on the line. I went to the hospital, got stitched up, and went right back to work. Like, what the hell? What was that all about? Any other place, you wouldn't expect to come back. But I'm like, I'll be back, chef, like I'm some hero. And it's silly. I'm glad that the culture is shifting. I'm glad that these new generations, Gen Z in particular, are pushing us, and maybe, younger millennials, they're pushing us to be better in these spaces. It may piss some of y'all, y'all off, but it's wonderful. And because we get to expand and explore what it's like to be ourselves, still get the work done. It's still hard work. Don't get me wrong. It's still backbreaking, ball busting work. But we have to evolve. And I believe part of that evolution is stepping into who we truly are. and you see it in a way that, and people see you in a way that just elevates you, so to speak. And you can be like that lighthouse for others. You can be that North Star for others. They can see you and go, I strive for that. I want to be that. So if this is all to say, if you are holding back, if you are pulling away, if you're retracting, if you're impugning entire communities or industries, then you're doing yourself and others a disservice. This is a time to show up in your full self. And this is as much as anything I talk about here, this is as much for me as it is you. Because we're here to help one another. We're here to, as Ram Dass says, we're here to walk each other home. So that's all I got. You know, I think what got me all teared up was when I was thinking about those lights, those chefs and managers and other people who I just adored. And I think what got me teary is thinking how I felt sad for myself back then. I felt sad that that younger self of me who was scared, who's drinking himself into oblivion, who wanted to just be and felt like he couldn't be. And I'm sad. I feel sad. I think I was feeling sad for that younger me. But the younger me got me to where I am here. And here I'm able to share this with you. So I thank and honor younger Paul for sticking it through, getting sober, taking care of himself, loving himself more, so that I can share this message with you. And that's all we've got. Thank you for being here. Check out any past episodes, share, like, do all the things. If you haven't signed up for my email list, I'm going to be sharing some big news, some good stuff. There's so much happening. Oh my gosh. And then there's UR Gumbo. Check it all out, my friends. All the links are in the description. And if you can share this with anyone, that would be groovy. All right. Kitchen's closed. Now scram.